Hello, everyone. I am here with Dr. Patel. We are not related, but yes, she is a naturopathic doctor who has also suffered with Hashimoto's, and I cannot wait for her to share her story because a lot of you know my story and how I overcame Hashimoto's, but she has something to share with you in terms of healing Hashimoto's, and both of us are not on any thyroid medication. We're not using conventional approaches. So I can't wait for her to share on how she healed herself and how she's helping others heal themselves as well. Hello, Dr. Patel. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Hi, Shweta. Well, it's so good to be here with you, and your story in itself is so inspiring. So thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you so much for doing this for the community at large. Yeah,
Of
so cool.
course. Yeah. And I want to know, like, how did you get into the space? I mean, was it the autoimmune condition and then it was kind of like your passion and then you share your story with us?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so my story is a little like it's twofold. So I was, being Indian American, I was always kind of pushed into medicine in general. And so I was going the pre-med route, and I was planning on going to conventional medical school. That was the plan. And then I actually ended up getting my degree in pharmaceutical sciences. And as I was getting my degree, I remember being really confused because we would learn about the medications, and then we would learn about the side effects of those medications, and then the medications needed for those side effects, and then the medications needed for those side effects. And it was just this vicious cycle. And to me, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, this can't possibly be the only way to practice medicine. This doesn't feel right at all. And it just felt so wrong that that was the only way of practicing medicine. I have a lot of respect for conventional and Western medicine, because it can be very helpful in certain circumstances, but I knew that it wasn't the only way of practicing medicine. And then I had the opportunity to actually travel to Guatemala during my undergraduate career. And we did like this global health trip there. And I got to learn about the traditional medicines in Guatemala. And I had a Mayan healing session. And from those sorts of things, I realized I was like, wait, so there's other things out there. There are other things out there. And then I remembered, I was like, wait, I grew up with Ayurvedic medicine, this ancient Indian medicine that's just like been around for thousands of years and has been extremely well documented and researched. And I was like, well, I didn't know all that at that time. I just knew that my parents practiced a little bit of Ayurvedic medicine. I knew that we had our like haldi doodh, or golden milk, that we would drink anytime we didn't feel good. And I remember it helped. It helped. I would always feel better. And then there were other random remedies that my mom would do, and I had no idea what was in it, but I would feel better. And so I was like, okay, there's something to that. So then after undergrad, I decided to take a year off because I was like, I'm not ready for med school yet. I'm going to take a year off. I ended up studying a little bit of Ayurvedic medicine in India and worked for a nonprofit there, where I was like, okay, yeah, this is it. Like, I want to do something with herbal medicine. I wanted nutrition, exercise. I knew all of these things had to impact our health. And I really wanted to practice a type of medicine where I could encompass all of that and not just use pharmaceuticals. And so then I discovered naturopathic medicine, and I went to med school. And what I didn't realize was that all of the symptoms that I had experienced my entire life were also not normal. I thought that it was okay for me to be constipated my entire life, and have a bowel movement maybe once a week. I thought it was normal for me to just have irregular periods, maybe skip 1 to 2 or maybe 3 months of my cycle. I was like, oh, that's just my normal. And that was pretty much what I was told by most conventional doctors as well, was just like, that's just your normal. And so, and I had back pain since I was 9, and they were like, oh, it's probably because you play basketball. Not all the 9-year-old basketball players had back pain. So those were things that I realized that weren't actually normal. I just thought it was normal. And when I went to naturopathic school and finally saw a naturopathic doctor was when I learned that it wasn't normal. And I had a naturopathic doctor test all my labs. And so she assumed that I probably had some thyroid condition. Also, my thyroid gland was like extremely palpable. You could feel, like you could see it. It was really bad. Like it was definitely a goiter. And so the doctor was like, whoa, we need to check your thyroid. And my TSH levels were actually technically in the normal range, but my antibodies were through the roof. I had about 960 thyroid peroxidase antibodies. Yeah, it was, and I've only seen 2 people who've had more than me, like throughout my entire, medical school career. And since I've been practicing, I've only seen 2 people who had more than me. So it was clearly really inflamed. And so, yeah, and so then with naturopathic medicine, I was able to then heal myself, and now I experience none of those symptoms that I just mentioned, and I'm obviously older than I ever was, and now I experience no back pain. I experience no pain at all, and I have regular bowel movements every day that I feel so grateful for every day. My cycles are more normal, and so there's so many more things that have come into place, and that's kind of where even my passion just got ignited even more, because I was like, you can feel this great? Like I had no idea until I finally felt this great. And now I'm so passionate about helping other people feel this great as well.
That's incredible. So you like you were going to go into conventional medicine and then you kind of flipped the switch. It's interesting because I grew up in a family of pharmacists, and they were just like pill for everything, pill for this disease, Benadryl for that. And I had that same situation as you where my bowel movements weren't normal. And I would tell my dad, I'm like, hey, Dad, I think something's wrong. And he said, oh, just take some fiber, that'll solve the problem. And it's just, internally, I think you and I both felt that this wasn't very healing. Like it wasn't healing in a wholesome way. And a lot of these conventional approaches, I mean, you're right. It's like when you're in an acute situation, like with my second autoimmune condition, I was unconscious on the floor at the gym. I mean, yeah, at that point, nothing was going to work for me besides a blood transfusion. So, unless it gets to that point. But see, my approach with all of this after going through that is to have it not get to that point. And I think that's where people like you come in, where you help us sort of determine what is the root cause. A lot of people, I don't think they even understand the word root cause, because they may think, oh, you take vitamin D because you were low in vitamin D and that's a root cause. But, as soon as I started interviewing more and more doctors, I realized that the root cause is something more deeper than that. Wouldn't you agree?
I would 100% agree with that. And usually what I say is with the root cause, it's usually multifactorial. It's rarely that it's one thing that led to one condition, right? There's usually multiple factors that lead to it. And that was definitely the case for me. And I'm assuming the case for you as well. There were so many different parts that played in to my condition of Hashimoto's that it just doesn't make sense to be like, oh, it's just this one thing and let's just mask that. We got to look at it from a holistic perspective and really fully understand what's going on. And so my goal is to empower you just the way I feel, in the same way that I feel empowered. That one of the things my mentors said to me that I absolutely love is like, my job is to get myself out of a job, right? That is always going to be my job, is that you don't need to see me all the time. You should, like, maybe we can check in once a year, once every 6 months or something, just to make sure you're doing all right. But really, you should have the tools in your own tool belt to be able to support yourself, to prevent any exacerbation of whatever's going on, or like prevent any illness. And then if you need additional support, I'm here. But really, my job is for me to not have a job anymore.
I love that philosophy. I mean, you know, any doctor that tells you their job is to not either have a job or to have you not taking medication is a good doctor, I would say.
Yeah, I always joke. I'm trying to retire early. So if we can, if everyone can just heal immediately, I would be happy. I'm good.
I love that. Well, I mean, I love that like you took this holistic approach, even though you were like kind of stuck in that conventional way of thinking, and you were able to question everything, think outside the box, and get yourself out of your own mess, it seems like, in a holistic way. And so you were at this naturopath, and you guys you took a bunch of labs. You determined that you had a TPO of over 900, and your TSH, all those levels were kind of normal. So what was the next step you took?
So from there, I will say the first thing I was told to do, and this is the first thing I pretty much tell all of my patients to do also, is going gluten-free, is just completely avoiding gluten, because there's a lot of research behind gluten and Hashimoto's and how it exacerbates the condition. And we can get into that if you'd like, but I know we wanted to talk about some other things, but that was definitely one of the first things that I was told to do. So of course, diet makes a huge difference in our lifestyle, and then avoiding inflammatory foods in general. And then, honestly, a lot of what came after that was in terms of like my exercise routines and working on my stress management techniques. That honestly, a lot came from exploring and learning for myself, alongside the doctor. Whenever we realized that I did have heightened levels of stress, I was in med school when I found out. So obviously I was feeling a little bit more stressed out. But I always tended to be a more anxious person in general. And I had my first panic attack around that time. And that was when we were like, all right, we got to focus on that stress. First and last panic attack, thankfully. And that was like really when I started focusing in on that too. And I firmly believe, especially, I mean, now we have the research to back up this too, that working on my stress management techniques and incorporating these self-care practices into my life had really made a huge difference in my health.
Wow. So like because I was also very athletic, and I a lot of people don't believe that, like, you know, physical exercise is real stress on yourself. And because if you go to any conventional doctor, I've gotten all sorts of responses. Like, calories in is calories out. You need to exercise more. You need more physical activity. And it's like you kind of put, you know, more physical activity and do all this stuff, but I think it actually makes Hashimoto's worse. And I saw that with myself, because it got to a point where my body could not physically even get off the couch, you know, and it was in that chronic state of being fatigued. And that was kind of when I found out there's something deeper than this Hashimoto's. I mean, I've heard of tired, but this is beyond tired. And I had to figure out like what was wrong, and no doctor knew, like no conventional doctor knew how to approach it. Even functional medicine doctors at the time saw my thyroid levels being normal. And it wasn't until I went to a conference where I ran into a gypsy healer, true story, and she checked like my different levels using some old school machine, where it was like she put a little needle between your knuckles, and each one was like an organ in your body. And she saw that my adrenals were off. And that's when I realized that, wow, like, okay, so what do I do about this? And at first I couldn't take her seriously, because I'm like, okay, this person's not a doctor. But she gave me this supplement. It was like a raw adrenal extract. And I took it in 2 days. I had so much energy. It was like unreal. And within 2 weeks, my TSH and all these numbers just went back to normal. And so, see, like I realized that the adrenal glands are actually more important than people think they are.
Yeah, definitely. And that story is so fascinating, because one of the things that I also try to live by is being an open-minded skeptic, right? So always staying open, because even what I know is very limited, no matter how much education that I've experienced, I'm constantly learning, right? And there are people throughout the world who did not go to medical school, but they studied in a very different way. And that could be legitimate. I mean, it may not be, and that's why you have to continue to be a skeptic as well. But staying open to it is always my philosophy. Is like, okay, maybe I don't know about it, but I'm going to stay open, right? And I think that's cool that you did stay open to that, and it obviously helped, right? But that's why I also always recommend to also be skeptical, because you also never know, because it might not help. It
That
might
is
not be the
so
right
true.
way.
Absolutely. And when it comes to like even healing the adrenals, I think that's something that we're going to talk about and get into today. But maybe you can share your story around the adrenal glands and how you went about healing them.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, this is I love talking about this topic so much. It's so near and dear to my heart, because, like I said, I really feel like a lot of my health journey comes from healing my adrenals. And but for me, a lot of the healing came from actually starting to incorporate like healthy stress management techniques. So I started to practice more yoga and meditation. I started to journal more regularly. I started to um, take contrast showers. That sounds like something that doesn't necessarily affect your adrenals, but it actually 100% does. If you can't handle cold water at all, like you just can't stand it at all, that probably means your adrenals are exhausted, because you should be able to handle it. And so that is one thing. But just like starting to get your body adapting to that can be very supportive of your adrenal glands. And then of course, this is something that I kind of think that everyone should be doing in general, is doing some level of adaptogens. So I didn't do any of the glandular. I wasn't at that point of burnout, thankfully, but I did adaptogens and or adaptogenic herbs, and that 100% helped my journey. I'm still taking them every day, because I do think in our world today, we live in like just a chronically stressful world. And I personally do believe that everyone should be on some level of adaptogens, no matter what, because adaptogens really help smooth out that cortisol or that stress hormone response. And so it's not necessarily that you're just not going to have stress anymore. It's just helping to, when you do have stressors, it's just, instead of spiking, it kind of smooths it out.
I love that. Actually, I used adaptogens too, and that was I went to this like PhD endocrinologist who was also integrated medicine doctor, and he's the one that basically gave me two choices. He said I can go reset my immune system in India, or I could take Triphala, Ashwagandha, and Google and see how they help me. And I took those for a very long time. And like I saw myself just, not like basically being able to detoxify my body and getting out of that stress state. But it's interesting that you like talk about all these activities towards stress management and how you healed stress management, because I don't think people think about that these days. And a lot of these activities are just bringing you closer to peace in your life. Um, Whether it may be yoga or journaling or even meditation, they're teaching you how to get your body to get into that relaxed state, which is so hard because of the world we live in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's something that we can talk a little bit about. Like I guess I can start just like getting into it, because the reality is right now we want stress, or like we want to have a good stress response. We want to have our adrenals releasing that cortisol or that stress hormone, because if there is an actual stressor, we want to be able to react towards it, right? So if there is a legitimate bear coming after us, we want to be able to run away, right? Otherwise, we would just like sit, like whenever you were saying that you had no energy to get up or do anything, if you were in that state and a bear came, it would literally just end up killing you, right? And so we want to be able to have this activation of the stress response so that you can avoid those situations. But in those times, ideally what's happening is you're having the stress response, you're having the cortisol release, and you're having adrenaline release. But then right as soon as you're away from that bear, you're like, okay, cool, I'm with my family in my village, like it's chill. And that's how it should be. Now we can enjoy our food and relax and have fun and dance and play games and do all the things. But today we're in this state of chronic stress. And one thing that I've always found fascinating is that our brain literally doesn't know the difference between a bear coming after us and a deadline. Has no idea what the difference is. All it knows is stressor, react. And that's what we do. So there's a stressor and we react. And if we constantly have these stressors all day, every day, it leads to this point of you're just constantly in this level of high cortisol, where you're just like, you just have high cortisol or that stress hormone all over the place. And that will lead to a lot of these symptoms of like irritability, anxiety, even sadness or depression, and then feeling infertility, because when you're stressed out, if this bear is coming after you, the last thing on your mind is sex. The last thing on your mind is to produce a baby. The last thing on your mind is to pass a bowel movement, right? Like these are not things you want to think about when you're trying to run away from this bear. And so your body gets away from all of these parasympathetic activities, which the parasympathetic nervous system is like our rest and digest part of our nervous system, right? So we want it, if we're in this chronically stressful state, we're getting away from that. And so what we want to do is try to get our bodies and our minds back into this parasympathetic state as often as we can, whenever we can, because the goal is for that stress response to be there when needed, but not all the time.
Yeah, and that's it's like a totally different mindset, and it's so challenging because I remember I was like an athlete, someone who was running 20-mile marathons, to somebody who became someone who's taking yoga and not running at all, you know, and
Yeah.
it was a very big change because, you know, my mind was just in this state of like, am I going to have too much energy? Am I not going to be able to sleep at night? You know, and it's hard for somebody to get into that state of just relaxing, and especially during these times. And I think all these different circumstances you go through with these symptoms is trying to teach you how to relax and how to do things in a peaceful way where your body is aligning with what you're doing, instead of like forcing your body to do things that are not in its natural state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. So I was definitely not a marathon runner. I commend you for that. I have ran one marathon just to say I did it. And that was it. And I was like, I'm never doing this again. But I did do high intensity interval training. I would do it like 5 or 6 days a week. And so again, something that's like very exhausting on your system as well. So I can empathize with, you know, with the athletes. I also played basketball and tennis, and I was always an athlete. So that was something that I was like, wait, what? You don't just like push yourself until you pretty much die, was like the mentality, right? Like I remember hearing someone be like, if we're on a treadmill running together, I'll die before I let you win kind of mentality. And that's like our culture. We're in this like go I have to be like this intense, powerful person. And it's like, no, that's not eliciting peace at all within us, and it's actually causing a lot of problems. And so yeah, it's absolutely important to take that step back. Now, I still do some high intensity interval training, but I do it like once or twice a week. You know, it's totally changed. And I do more like Pilates and yoga, and I always will choose sleep over exercise if I ever have to make that choice. Sleep always trumps pretty much everything, really. Sleep and food. Uh, those are the things that always come first. I need my sleep and I need to eat well. And if those things are not there, then I won't feel as good. So I will always choose those over literally everything else. And so yeah, I think that's important to be mindful of. Like, people are so afraid. I know it. I know some of my patients, they'll wake up at 4:30 a.m. to exercise every morning, and they're only getting like 3 hours of sleep. And I'm like, no, no, no. If you have to choose between sleep and exercise, I want you to sleep.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
want you to sleep.
I mean, sleep is, I saw that myself where, the more I was sleeping, the more I was relaxing, the more energy I had to even work out. And I guess the more performance I had in me. But it was this like rat race, especially living in Silicon Valley where everything is demanding and you're treated like a number and you're in competition with everyone from every Ivy League school. And it's kind of like, okay, well, health just gets thrown out the window. And that's where I kind of stopped, because I said, hey, my health is first. I don't know about you, but I went through some traumatic situations with my health, and I need to sleep 8 hours a day. I need to be able to eat at least 3 meals a day. And I want to be able to have that peace in my life. And so most of these executives were not cool with that. They were like, no, you need to get out of here, because like we expect you to bring your sleeping bag here and sleep here and work here. And yeah, it was a very like rigorous work lifestyle. And that's when I kind of just left, because I could not believe that these people, especially entrepreneurs, were not putting healthy lifestyle before anything else. I mean, without your health, what do you have?
Right. And the unfortunate part about all of that is the reality is, if you have your health and all the other employees, everyone else working there has their health in place, they can be so much more productive and happier and more fulfilled. And there's a longer lifespan of like, see, you ended up leaving, right? So if they were to take care of you, to understand that your health is of utmost importance, you would have stayed, right? Like, there would have been a whole different sort of situation. And you could be so much more productive and creative and innovative, right? Like, all these things that come up whenever you actually take care of your health. So I appreciate the companies that actually do value that, but it is so unfortunate that so many companies kind of force burnout upon people, right? So we just get this constant level of like stress, like chronic stress, which then eventually leads to this feedback loop of your adrenal glands just not producing any cortisol. So no stress hormone at all. And now you can't function at all. Like, you're just done. You have no motivation. You can't concentrate. You can't remember things. It's just, you're not as productive. You're not as efficient. And to me, it makes no sense. I'm like, well, if you want efficient, productive employees, then we should focus on their health and wellness, right?
Right. So yeah, even going back to the adrenal glands, I remember when I started taking the supplement, and I realized, okay, it's more than the supplement. I really have to relax. Like, I have to like reduce stress in my life in a big way. So yeah, I had left the job, reduced my exercise, started to be more mindful. And then I realized that like I took my labs again, and my aldosterone was actually excessive. And I was like, okay, so should I have stopped the extract that I was taking, the supplement? Maybe it's too much on my system. So I stopped it, because I was like, okay, I started taking really high doses. I tapered down. Then I started taking like maybe one a day. And then I kind of just tapered off of that, because I felt like I could produce my own adrenal function at that point without anything. And I had reduced the stress in my life. Was that a smart way to approach it?
Definitely, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because when it comes to those glandulars, I actually try not to recommend them as much as possible. There are definitely people I have recommended them for, and people who absolutely need it. But when I do recommend them, they are intended to be short term. You're not meant to really be taking that long term. The adaptogens that can be taken long term, they're very mild. They have like a more mild effect, and so those are fine. But the glandulars I usually do recommend short term.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I still take the adaptogens. I mean, the Triphala, I take ashwagandha, Google. Are those the ones you recommend?
Yeah, those are some amazing ones. I love those. I definitely do ashwagandha. I like to do shatavari as well. That's So the way I like to explain that one's like the more feminine version of, or the feminine balance of the ashwagandha. So ashwagandha is more of the masculine herb. It's more of like the world we live in today, much more masculine dominant, right? And so we all can use ashwagandha because of the world we live in. But then I think the shatavari kind of helps bring in like that little bit more of the nurturing, supportive side. So the ashwagandha kind of helps you go, 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 right? Where the shatavari kind of helps you be like, okay, like it's okay to have like a more calm response to everything. It doesn't have to be as quick, but it supports you in that way. And it also helps support your immune system too, which I really like about that. The other ones that I like to take are ginseng is a really good one, and reishi mushroom is also a great one. Those are probably some of the most common ones that I usually recommend. I'm trying to think of. Oh, and rhodiola can be used as well. And so it also kind of depends on where you're at too. So we kind of talked about how your adrenal glands can get to a point where it's just producing so much cortisol, and that eventually it gets exhausted, right? And that's the point of burnout. But when that happens, there's a few different things I would recommend. So if you reach that point of burnout, then rhodiola would probably be beneficial for you because it's more stimulating. But if you're still at that high point where you haven't reached burnout, but you're just like an excessive cortisol level, and then if you're there, then I usually wouldn't recommend rhodiola. I'd recommend things like ginseng or shatavari, or maybe even lavender, like, or chamomile can be more calming too. So things like that. So it just kind of depends on where you are. And usually I do like to do the salivary cortisol test. I think you said you did something like that. Yeah, so I usually do like to test for that to see where exactly you are. Though usually you can figure out based on symptoms where people are. It's just helpful to have that like concrete data on
Yeah,
what's going to be the most supportive.
so true. I mean, I remember like the morning cortisol would always be good, and then it was like around 5 p.m. I would crash every day, and I did not know why for the longest time. And that's when I had figured out the aldosterone was actually elevated, and I said, wow, like, okay, I need to like stop this glandular and kind of let my body do its thing. And people don't realize, I think, they're suffering from these symptoms so much that it makes it really hard for you to even think, like even use common sense sometimes. And even I was stuck in that place of like, how do I go about this, like what's the best way? And a lot of people get things thrown at them, like gut issues, like hormonal imbalances, estrogen dominance, like all these different things, right? And every doctor has their own philosophy, but I love how you talk about the adrenal glands, because I believe that's where it starts. I think, like when your body gets into that fight or flight mode in an excessive state is when you would probably get into an autoimmune condition because it's extra stress. Is that your thinking behind it as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, all of those things that you mentioned, like the gut dysfunction, right? Uh, Estrogen dominance, or having hormonal imbalances in general, all of these things, there has been research that showed that your adrenal glands and the adrenal insufficiency can actually lead to that, right? So And there's more and more research coming out essentially every day on how stress can lead to or exacerbate any condition. And so this is why this is something I feel very passionately about, because I'm like, if we support the adrenals, maybe we won't fix everything, but we can fix a lot of things, right? We can help a lot of people. And so, yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating. And what's really crazy is, like, in terms of the thyroid, since we wanted to talk a little bit more about Hashimoto's and the thyroid, is that the stress response from the adrenal glands will actually signal our pituitary gland to reduce the TSH levels, because we don't want to produce as much of the thyroid hormone when we're under stress. Again, one of those things, that's not what's on our mind if a bear is coming after us. We're not focused on our thyroid gland. We're not focused on our immune function. And so when that happens, it creates this feedback loop, and then eventually can lead to, like I said, elevated TSH levels, and low free T3 and free T4. The free T3 is what's the active component of our thyroid hormone, and when you have less of that, then you have less energy. You're not able to do really anything, and so that's kind of how it can affect it. And then it can lead to more of the reverse T3 being formed, which is the inactive form, and we don't necessarily want as much of that. So yeah, there's like a direct impact on how your stress levels and that burnout from your adrenal glands can lead to Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism in general.
Absolutely. So we talked about a lot today, and as we're coming to an end here, I kind of just want to go into maybe different protocols for women. We talked about stress management, adaptogens. We talked about like different activities they can do, even journaling. What are some protocols that you give your patients who come in with adrenal fatigue and Hashimoto's? I mean, they both kind of go together, so.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm going to start by saying that every single wellness plan that I give any patient of mine is completely individualized. What I tell you to do and versus another patient would be maybe completely different, maybe similar, but it's always going to be at least a little different, because I will always meet you where you are. So, so my goal is to work with you. So maybe for one person, they're really excited to meditate. Maybe for another person, they're like, I just can't do that. And so we start with a breathing exercise instead, and we start with journaling instead, right? So there's going to be some nuances of differences, but in general, I definitely do always recommend multiple forms of stress management techniques already from the first visit, whether, like I said, those are kind of some of the most common things I recommend: yoga, meditation, journaling. And those are the most common things I recommend. But then also we talk about sleep hygiene, making sure you're turning off all your electronics before bed. One of the things I talk about, which sounds so crazy, but makes a huge difference, is just like closing out all your tabs on your computer, right? Just closing them all out and letting go of the day as a ritual, just letting that go, okay? Because I feel like most people keep their computers on because they're like, oh, I gotta start that same work tomorrow. And I'm like, no, we're letting that go. Today is over, we're ready to go to bed, and that can help us with our sleep as well, just like shifting that mindset. But then also, of course, food is medicine. Our stress levels can affect our gut health, but our gut health can affect our stress as well, and our mood and everything. So making sure that we're eating as well as possible. I usually actually recommend trying to get 9 cups of vegetables a day, getting all those wonderful plant flavonoids in, and the antioxidants, getting all the anti-inflammatory herbs in your foods and things like that. So as much as you can. I mean, 9 cups is hard to do. I usually get about 7 to 8 on average a day myself, but most days I actually can get 9, but there are definitely days where it's not as much, which is totally okay. But I think a big part of what I always recommend is giving yourself grace through the whole process and loving yourself wherever you are in your healing journey, because it's not an easy journey. It's not a quick journey. It's it's a lifelong journey, really. So we got to love ourselves where we are and support ourselves and give ourselves grace throughout the process. Like I said, I don't always get 9 cups of vegetables a day, but that's okay. uh, I might get a gluten-free pizza, which is still like slightly inflammatory, or it is still inflammatory. I don't know why I said slightly. It is still inflammatory technically, but it's okay, because I most of my life I'm focused on my healing, and I do right. I give myself grace. So I think that's a big part of what I recommend.
I love that. And in terms of like case studies, can you kind of walk us through somebody who had Hashimoto's? I know, like, you're an example, you're a walking example, but have you ever worked with anyone else that kind of came in to you and said, "Hey, I have Hashimoto's. I also have weight gain problems. How can you help me?"
Yeah, I've definitely had multiple patients with Hashimoto's, and especially I think because I have that story and I share that story with people, I can empathize, right, with people who've been through Hashimoto's, and so yeah, so I have quite a few, but I'll give like one example, just like a recent example that I've had in my practice. This patient came in, she had Hashimoto's. She was on medication, but not really seeing any changes in her symptoms. Her lab values looked better, but they actually never checked for antibodies. So of course, that's one of the first things that I did, was check for antibodies, and she did have that. She was also trying to get pregnant and struggling with that as well. And so there was a combination, of course, of your thyroid hormone affects your reproductive hormones as well. So she was struggling with that. She was also having some weight gain, joint pain, constipation, irregular cycles as well. And that was like a part of her, I think they were more anovulatory cycles, so she wasn't really ovulating. And so we started, first things first, like I said, going gluten-free. I had her, shift her diet to go completely gluten-free. And then we worked on some stress management techniques. She definitely had some level of anxiety as well, which I think, is extremely common in our culture. So we did that, and then I recommended some supplements with selenium, zinc, tyrosine, and then the adaptogens, like I'd mentioned. And within about 6 months, her antibodies had normalized, and she wasn't really experiencing any symptoms. And then now she's actually pregnant. So this is a few months later. So it's
Wow.
actually exciting. Yeah. So it's been about a year of a journey, and now she's pregnant. Yeah.
That's a dream come true. And
Yeah.
all of her symptoms had reversed.
Yeah, it was really exciting. And so, and like now and what I always like to talk about is like the epigenetics of it too. It's so fascinating how we can turn on and off our gene expressions. But now she's able to work through, like she's been able to turn off that genetic expression too, and ideally will not pass it on to her future baby too, which is really exciting also.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, because I did have the genes for autoimmune conditions and had to go through all of them. But I think, the stress really switches these genetic expressions on, and it's hard to turn them off after that.
Definitely. And so what I always like to say is that, I mean, diseases can be passed on generationally and hereditary, but so can healing, right? So if we start to heal ourselves, then we can pass that on to our future generations too. Even if we've already have kids, right? There are people who have already have kids and don't plan on having any more, right? Like you can heal yourself, and while you heal yourself, your child is also able to work on themselves too. And then you're changing generations. You really are, which is so cool to me.
That's so true. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I love your story. I love the case studies, the protocols. It's been an incredible call. And I would love to stay in touch, and would love to have my guests get in touch with you if they need your help. What's the best way?
Yeah, of course. So I'm all over social media. I think my main platform where I'm most active is Instagram, but I am also on Twitter, LinkedIn, social media, or not social media, Facebook, and TikTok. I'm also on TikTok, which is really fun. And my handle is Holistic Hanisha, and my practice is called Mahan Health. So I have social media pages for that as well. And then I also have a podcast where that you can listen to. It's called Mahan Health. Mahan means great in Sanskrit. And as I stated from the very beginning, this is why I'm super passionate about what I do, is because I feel like I've been able to experience great health, and my goal is for everyone to experience great health so I can get out of a job. And so that's why I have this podcast. And you can also, my website is also mahanhealth.com. And I do see patients and clients virtually, as well as in person. I am in person in Ohio, but I do see people virtually, which is really great in general. And I'm grateful I was doing this pre-COVID. So I already had everything established before all of the COVID stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I will add all of your links so anybody who wants to can get in touch with you. And I love that. I saw that this sort of thing was coming where things would be more virtual, and I'm so glad that you're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I had that established pre-COVID. It definitely was a smoother transition, I feel.
That's great. So what's one big takeaway you have for us today, if anything? Where can somebody get started on this healing journey of healing their adrenals and healing Hashimoto's?
Oh, one thing. I think the main thing, honestly, is mindset. Mindset, I think, is key. So being very mindful of the things that you say to yourself, instead of being like, why am I dealing with this, to being like, I'm grateful for my healing, kind of just shifting those conversations in our head, and what we say out loud, and having having a toolbox of like healthy stress management techniques. So trying to like get those wherever you can, I think is great. We talked about a few examples today, but there are so many other things, like taking an Epsom salt bath or forest bathing, or going out in nature, whatever it is. Just having a toolbox of things that can support you to then support your adrenals and your thyroid and literally all aspects of your health.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Hanisha Patel. I will be in touch with you, and we would love to have you back one day.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing. So fun.
Okay.